The hum of the private jet's engines finally died, replaced by the heavy, humid air of a Seoul twilight. Amara Cole stepped onto the tarmac, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was entirely alone in a foreign hemisphere, stripped of her sovereignty by a single signature on a debt contract. Surrounding her were three men in impeccably tailored charcoal suits, their expressions as rigid and unreadable as stone. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their silent, synchronized movements guided her directly into the plush leather interior of a waiting Maybach. As the car glided effortlessly through the neon-drenched arteries of the city, Amara stared out the window, her deep brown skin catching the fleeting reflections of towering skyscrapers and luxury storefronts. This city was beautiful, but to her, it was a beautifully constructed cage. Her father's sins had bought her passage here, trading her freedom to erase a mountain of underground gambling debt. She braced herself for a monster. She expected a grotesque, brutal warlord who would immediately seek to break her spirit. The Maybach ascended a winding, heavily guarded private road, finally pulling up to a hyper-luxurious mansion that seemed to hover over the glowing Seoul skyline. The architecture was a seamless blend of cold concrete, reinforced glass, and stark, minimalist wealth. When the heavy double doors opened, she was led into a sprawling penthouse living room. The view of the city below was breathtaking, but Amara's eyes instantly locked onto the man standing by the floor-to-ceiling glass. Kang Min-Jae. He was 28, but he possessed the heavy, suffocating gravity of a king. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore a tailored black suit that molded perfectly to his athletic frame. His black hair was slicked back, accentuating a sharp, flawless jawline and pale skin. As he turned slowly, Amara caught the subtle glimpse of elegant black and grey tattoos creeping up his neck from beneath his open collar. His dark eyes, completely devoid of emotion, fixed on her. The silence in the room stretched, thick and agonizing. Amara held her breath, her full lips parting slightly, her body tensing for a blow, a command, or a cruel laugh. Instead, Min-Jae simply poured amber whiskey into a crystal glass. He didn't close the distance between them. He didn't touch her. He merely leaned against the dark marble bar, swirling the liquid, studying her like a priceless piece of art he now owned. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't a roar. It was a soft, velvety baritone that sent a shiver straight down her spine. "You are trembling, Amara." "I am not a piece of property," she whispered back, her voice shaking, despite her best efforts to project the resilience burning inside her. Min-Jae took a slow sip, his intense gaze tracking the defiance in her eyes. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, cold and entirely mesmerizing. "In this house, you will want for nothing. But make no mistake, your old life is gone. You belong to the House of Kang now." By morning, the gilded cage felt even smaller. Amara stood in the center of a walk-in closet, larger than her entire apartment back home, staring at rows of silk dresses, designer heels, and tailored gowns that bore the labels of elite European fashion houses. Next to them sat a vanity, topped with a lavish breakfast spread, caviar, pristine pastries, and imported fruit. It was a display of absolute wealth, and she loathed every inch of it. When the maid returned an hour later, she found the food untouched and the luxury clothes ignored. Amara remained in the same simple, worn denim jacket and cotton dress she had arrived in, sitting stiffly on the edge of the velvet armchair. "She refuses to eat, sir, and she won't change." The soft murmur came from the doorway, where Min-Jae stood. He dismissed the maid with a single slight nod. He looked effortlessly striking in a fresh slate-grey suit, his dark hair immaculate, the expensive scent of sandalwood and cedar trailing behind him. He didn't look angry. Instead, he stepped into the room, with an unsettling, quiet patience, observing her stubborn posture. "A hunger strike, Amara?" Min-Jae asked softly, his baritone voice washing over the tense silence. He walked over to the vanity, picking up a silver fork, examining it before setting it down. "A beautiful dress is not a shackle. Food is not a trap. It's your money," Amara said, her voice tight as she met his intense dark eyes. "Accepting it means accepting that you bought me. I am not your doll." Min-Jae stared at her for a long beat, his expression a mask of calm fascination. "Your defiance is amusing, but your starvation is impractical. We have guests." He didn't force her. Instead, he simply gestured for her to follow him down to his private study. Inside, a heavy-set older associate of the syndicate, smelling of cheap cigars and sweat, was waiting to discuss a shipping manifest. When Min-Jae entered with Amara behind him, the man's eyes traveled rakishly down her body, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. "So this is the American debt payment?" The associate scoffed, speaking in English with a thick accent. "A pretty little thing. If you get bored of her, Chairman Kang, my men could always find a use for—" The air in the room instantly turned to sub-zero ice. Min-Jae didn't raise his voice. He didn't even blink. He merely raised a single ringed finger. Two massive guards materialized from the shadows of the room, grabbing the associate by his arms before the man could finish his sentence. "Chairman!" "Wait, I didn't mean get him out of my sight," Min-Jae said, his voice a soft, lethal whisper that cut through the man's panicked apologies. "And strip him of his territories." As the screaming man was quietly dragged out, Min-Jae turned back to Amara. He stepped closer, close enough for her to feel the heat radiating from his broad frame. He tilted his head, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a terrifyingly protective obsession. "No one speaks to you like that," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her stubborn, full lips. "No one touches you. In Seoul, you are untouchable to everyone. Except me." The night air was thick with the scent of rain and ozone as the black Maybach rolled into Gangnam. The neon veins of Seoul bleeding pink and sapphire light across the leather seats. Amara sat in the back, her fingers tightly intertwined. She had finally relented, wearing a sleek, emerald green silk dress that draped beautifully over her curves, though she wore it like armor rather than an ornament. Min-Jae sat beside her, a shadow wrapped in a tailored tuxedo, his silver rings catching the passing streetlights. He hadn't spoken a word, but his possessive aura filled the car, heavy and suffocating. They descended into the belly of an exclusive underground casino hidden beneath a 5-star hotel. The atmosphere inside was the intoxicating mix of high-stakes tension and dark luxury. Crystal chandeliers hung above velvet poker tables where the city's corrupt elite gambled fortunes away. Min-Jae guided her through the crowd, his hand resting lightly but firmly at the small of her back. The touch was burning, a constant reminder of who held her leash. He led her to a private, glass-walled VIP lounge where a man was already waiting, swirling a glass of expensive cognac. Cha Hyun-woo, the rival syndicate boss, was younger, his smile laced with a chaotic, dangerous edge. As they took their seats, Hyun-woo's eyes immediately bypassed Min-Jae, locking onto Amara. His gaze traveled brazenly over her deep brown skin, lingering on her soft lips and the elegant curve of her collarbone. A slow, predatory grin spread across his face. "So the rumors are true, Chairman Kang," Hyun-woo purred, leaning forward, his eyes never leaving Amara's face. "You imported a masterpiece, a rare, exquisite jewel. Name your price. I'll double her father's debt tonight." The ambient noise of the casino seemed to vanish instantly. Min-Jae's calm, calculated demeanor didn't just crack. It shattered into a sub-zero, lethal stillness. He didn't yell. He didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, he leaned back, his dark eyes turning entirely pitch black, devoid of any humanity. The silver rings on his fingers tapped a slow, agonizing rhythm against the mahogany table. The air in the VIP room grew so heavy that Amara found it hard to breathe. The guards at the door visibly stiffened, their hands moving closer to their holsters. "Hyunwoo," Min-Jae whispered, his voice a soft, terrifying rasp that made the rival boss's grin instantly falter. "Look at her again, and I will rip your eyes out of your skull myself." The absolute gravity of his threat hung in the air, violent and absolute. Hyunwoo swallowed hard, his bravado evaporating under the weight of a man who could command an execution with a blink. Amara stared at Min-Jae, her heart hammering against her ribs. In that suffocating silence, a terrifying realization washed over her. This wasn't about a financial transaction. It wasn't about a debt to be collected. Min-Jae didn't view her as a contract. He viewed her as his absolute obsession. The violent shatter of safety glass was the only warning they received. The Maybach reeled as heavy gunfire erupted from a blacked-out SUV, trailing them through the rain-slicked streets of Seoul. Before Amara could even gasp, Min-Jae's massive frame was over her, shielding her body with his own as his guards returned fire into the neon night. It was over in a matter of breathless seconds, a roaring engine, a tactical maneuver by their driver, and the rogue faction was left bleeding on the asphalt behind them. But as they tore away into the safety of the penthouse garage, Amara winced, a sharp sting blooming along her shoulder. A stray shard of glass had sliced through her emerald dress, staining the fabric a deep, wet crimson. Once inside the safety of the hyper-luxurious penthouse, the air remained charged with a frantic, dangerous energy. Min-Jae didn't call for his private medics. Instead, he gripped Amara's uninjured arm and guided her straight into his vast, marble-accented bathroom. He ripped off his tailored suit jacket and threw it to the floor, aggressively unbuttoning his black dress shirt until it hung open, completely exposing his chest and torso. For the first time, Amara saw the full extent of his ink. The massive, intricate dragon tattoo that stretched across his collarbone, its claws wrapping around his throat, and the dark grey sleeves winding down both arms like armor. He returned to her with a medical kit, his breathing shallow, his dark eyes ablaze with a rare, unchecked emotion. Panic. "Sit," he commanded softly, the usual icy composure entirely gone from his baritone voice. Amara sat on the edge of the marble counter, holding her breath as he knelt between her thighs. With agonizing gentleness, his large ringed hands cut away the torn silk of her sleeve. His touch was so light it was almost reverent. He soaked a cotton pad in antiseptic and pressed it to her deep brown skin. Amara hissed at the sting, her fingers instinctively clutching his broad, tattooed shoulders. Min-Jae froze. He looked up, his intense eyes locking onto hers, just inches away. "I'm sorry," he whispered, a sound so raw she barely recognized it. "I told you that you were untouchable. I let them hurt you." Amara stared down at him, her heart hammering not from fear but from the sudden suffocating proximity. Seeing him like this, breathless, unbuttoned, desperately worried over a minor scratch, cracked the monstrous facade he presented to the world. Beneath the ruthless mafia king was a man entirely undone by her pain. As he carefully applied a white bandage over her wound, his thumb lingered, stroking the soft skin of her collarbone. The silence between them shifted from terrifying to intoxicatingly seductive. Amara felt a dangerous addiction sparking in her chest. She hated his control. But as she looked into his desperate, obsessive eyes, she realized she was hopelessly falling for his protection. The mahogany box waiting on the bed was lined with black velvet housing a custom-made gown of midnight blue silk that felt like liquid starlight. Beside it lay a heavy diamond collar, its stones catching the afternoon sun spilling across the penthouse. There was no note from Min-Jae, but the message was clear. This evening was a declaration of war masked as a celebration, a massive high society gala, hosted at one of his luxury hotels, to flaunt his absolute dominance over the trembling factions of Seoul. For weeks, Amara had worn her simple clothes like a shield, a silent protest against her confinement. But as she stared at the gown, something shifted inside her. Pushing back had kept her safe, but it had also kept her small. If she was going to survive in his world, she could no longer hide in the shadows of his mansion. She needed to own the space she occupied. When the double doors of the hotel's grand ballroom opened, a suffocating silence rippled through the sea of Seoul's corrupt elite, politicians, and rival syndicate leaders. Amara stepped into the light. The midnight blue silk draped flawlessly over her curves, contrasting exquisitely with her glowing deep brown skin. Her dark curly hair was styled into an elegant, voluminous crown, and the diamonds around her neck burned under the crystal chandeliers. She did not walk with the tentative steps of a captive. She carried herself with an unyielding, magnetic grace that demanded total submission from every eye in the room. Min-Jae stood at the far end of the ballroom, surrounded by a circle of powerful men who immediately fell silent as he turned. For a fraction of a second, the legendary, emotionless mask of the Kang syndicate boss slipped. His dark eyes flared with an intense consuming heat that nearly brought Amara to a halt. His black hair was slicked back perfectly, his tailored tuxedo framing his broad shoulders. But his gaze was entirely primal. He walked toward her, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. When he reached her, he did not offer a polite, distant greeting. He slid his large, ringed hand firmly around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest in front of everyone. The possessive weight of his touch sent a familiar, intoxicating shiver down her spine. "You look breathtaking, Amara," he murmured, his soft baritone carrying an edge of fierce, lethal pride that echoed for only her to hear. Amara looked up into his intense eyes, her hand resting against his lapel, feeling the steady, powerful thud of his heart. She could feel the envious stares of jealous socialites and the calculating glares of his enemies. But for the first time, she didn't feel afraid. She had fully stepped into his orbit, aligning her gravity with his. She was no longer just a debt to be paid. She was the woman standing beside the king. The crystal chandeliers did not fall. They exploded. The deafening roar of automatic gunfire shattered the high society symphony, plunging the grand ballroom into instantaneous bloody chaos. Screams tore through the air as Seoul's elite scattered like panicked livestock. Min-Jae's reaction was instantaneous. In a heartbeat, his broad frame was shielding Amara, his large hand slamming her head against his chest, while his other hand drew a sleek silver firearm from his tuxedo jacket. The calm predator had vanished, replaced by an entity of pure lethal instinct. "Stay behind me!" he commanded, his baritone cracking with a rare, violent urgency. Smoke and tear gas flooded the room, blinding and suffocating. Min-Jae's guards engaged a coordinated strike team wearing the tactical gear of Cha Hyun-woo's syndicate. Min-Jae fired with terrifying precision, dragging Amara toward the private VIP exit. But the ambush was too calculated. A flashbang grenade detonated just meters away, a blinding white light and a high-pitched ring tearing through Amara's senses. The concussive force ripped her hand from Min-Jae's grip. She stumbled backward into the suffocating haze, coughing, her midnight blue silk gown snagging on shattered glass. Through the smoke, rough hands grabbed her. She fought wildly, her heels digging into the floor, her nails tearing at her captors' faces. but a heavy cloth laced with chloroform pressed firmly over her lips. As her vision darkened, the last thing she saw through the smog was Min-Jae clearing the path ahead, oblivious for a fraction of a second that she was no longer behind him. When the smoke finally cleared, the ballroom was a graveyard of broken glass, velvet, and blood. Min-Jae turned, his eyes searching the wreckage. "Amara?" There was no answer, only a torn, blood-stained scrap of midnight blue silk hooked on a shattered chair. In that agonizing moment, the legendary, calculated composure of Kang Min-Jae did not just fracture, it ceased to exist. His breath hitched, a low, animalistic growl rising from his chest. The guards around him held their breath, terrified to even look at their chairman. The man who ordered executions with a soft whisper now looked like a demon unleashed. He grabbed his lead enforcer by the throat, his dark eyes ablaze, with an absolute, unhinged madness. "Call everyone," Min-Jae hissed, his voice shaking with a terrifying primal rage that vibrated through the ruined hall. "Every soldier, every asset, every corrupt official we own. Shut down the ports, block the highways. If Cha Hyun-woo thinks he can hide her, I will tear this city apart, brick by brick." He crushed the piece of silk in his fist, his knuckles turning stark white. He no longer cared about his billionaire reputation, his legal hotels, or his carefully hidden empires. Cha Hyun-woo had taken his obsession. And for that, Min-Jae was going to burn Seoul to ash. The cold concrete of the abandoned dockside warehouse bit through what remained of Amara's midnight blue silk gown. Heavy iron chains chafed against her wrists, binding her to a rusted chair beneath the harsh, flickering buzz of a single halogen bulb. Across from her stood Cha Hyun-woo's lead enforcer, a scarred man whose patience was rapidly wearing thin. He slammed a heavy fist onto the metal table between them, the sound echoing through the damp, cavernous space. "Where are the routing numbers for the Kang syndicate's offshore accounts?" he snarled, leaning into her face, his breath reeking of stale tobacco. "Your billionaire lover keeps his financial keys close. You're his favorite pet. Speak, or we start cutting." Amara did not flinch. Her deep brown skin was smudged with soot, and her throat was parched, but her expressive eyes remained fiercely alive, burning with a quiet, calculated intelligence. She looked at the scarred man, letting out a soft, mocking laugh that caught him completely off guard. "Offshore accounts?" she asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. "If you think a man like Kang Min-Jae gives his financial secrets to a woman he bought to settle a debt, you know absolutely nothing about him. You kill me, and you get 0-1. You keep me alive, and you might actually have a bargaining chip. But if you touch me—" She leaned forward, her full lips curving into a dangerous, slow smile. "You won't live long enough to regret it." She was stalling, using her sharp wit to dissect their greed and buy herself precious minutes. But as she spoke his name, a profound, terrifying realization bloomed in her chest. She wasn't just using Min-Jae's reputation as a shield, she was desperately longing for him. The fierce independence that had once made her view him as a monster had dissolved. In the dark, she realized she had grown hopelessly, deeply attached to the dangerous, obsessive protection of the man who held her contract. Miles away, the city of Seoul was bleeding. Min-Jae was tearing through the underworld like a localized hurricane, leaving a trail of absolute, unmitigated destruction in his wake. He didn't ask questions softly anymore. Dropping the polished facade of a billionaire hotelier, he moved through the neon-lit back alleys and rival safe houses like a demon incarnate. Front doors were blown off their hinges, syndicate dens were reduced to splinters and ash. Min-Jae stood in the rain outside a burning rival compound, his tailored tuxedo soaked in water and the blood of his enemies, his dark hair falling messily across his forehead. He didn't feel the cold. He felt nothing but a hollow, raging void. Every second Amara was out of his sight was an eternity of torture. He loaded a fresh magazine into his firearm, his dark eyes locked on the black horizon. He was getting closer. The heavy iron doors of the warehouse didn't just open, they tore off their hinges with a deafening metallic shriek. Through the billowing dust and torrential rain pouring through the breach, a solitary figure stepped into the light. Kang Min-Jae. His tailored tuxedo was shredded. His white dress shirt, soaked in rain and stained with the crimson of the men who had tried to block his path outside. His slicked-back hair had fallen into a wild, messy fringe over his eyes, and the dragon tattoo across his collarbone flushed dark with adrenaline. He was alone, having outpaced his own guards in his desperate, unhinged race to find her. "Chairman Kang," Cha Hyun-woo barked, stepping out from the shadows of the catwalk, a twisted grin masking his sudden terror. "You came alone for a piece of property?" Min-Jae didn't waste breath on words. His dark eyes locked onto Amara, bound to the chair, and a primal, terrifying rage unleashed. He moved like a shadow, firing with lethal, robotic precision. The warehouse erupted into a brutal, close-quarters showdown. Hyun-woo's remaining enforcers swarmed him, but Min-Jae fought with a savage intensity, using his firearm, his fists, and the environment to decimate the ranks. He shattered jaws and snapped bones, a billionaire turned absolute monster. But as Min-Jae pinned the layered enforcer to the concrete, snapping his neck, Cha Hyun-woo emerged from behind a stack of shipping crates just feet away. Hyun-woo raised a heavy-caliber pistol, aiming directly at the back of Min-Jae's head, while his blind side was exposed. "Min-Jae, watch out!" Amara screamed. In that split second, the chains holding her chair slipped against the slick, blood-covered concrete. Amara didn't hesitate. Shedding every ounce of her past identity as a passive victim, a helpless debt payment, she threw her entire body weight sideways. The heavy iron chair slammed violently into Hyun-woo's legs just as his finger squeezed the trigger. The gunshot went wide, echoing harmlessly into the rafters. Min-Jae spun instantly. His dark eyes flashed with an apocalyptic fury as he realized how close he had come to losing everything. Before Hyun-woo could recover, Min-Jae closed the distance, grabbing the rival boss by the throat and lifting him off his feet. With 3 cold, thunderous shots, Cha Hyun-woo's syndicate was permanently dismantled. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the heavy patter of rain on the corrugated roof. Min-Jae dropped the weapon, his knees hitting the concrete as he scrambled to Amara's side. His large, trembling hands tore the chains away from her wrists. He pulled her fiercely into his broad chest, burying his face into her dark, curly hair, his entire frame shaking. Amara clung back, her fingers sinking into his soaked shirt, breathing in his scent of sandalwood and copper. "I have you," Min-Jae whispered, his velvety baritone cracking with a vulnerability he had never shown the world. He kissed her forehead, his lips pressing against her deep brown skin. "You are safe. Seoul is ours, Amara. No one will ever touch you again." The smell of expensive whiskey was replaced by the acrid, liberating scent of burning paper. On the dark marble table inside the Seoul penthouse, a single lighter flickered, its flame catching the edge of the thick official document that had bound Amara's life to a ghost. As the paper curled into black ash inside a crystal tray, her father's multi-million-dollar debt vanished from existence. Min-Jae stood across from her, his black hair combed back into place, wearing a fresh, immaculate black suit that hid the fresh bandages wrapping his torso. His dark eyes were fixed on her with a calm, heavy intensity that no longer terrified her. "The debt is erased," Min-Jae murmured, his soft baritone cutting through the quiet hum of the penthouse. "The private jet is waiting on the tarmac. You are free, Amara." You can return to your old life. No one is coming for you. Amara looked down at the ashes, then looked up into the eyes of the most feared man in Seoul. Her old life felt like a distant, fading dream. A life where she was small, running from ghosts, and hiding her own strength. She looked at his broad shoulders, at the subtle hint of the dragon tattoo peeking from his collar, and at the raw devotion hidden beneath his icy mask. She didn't want a life of running anymore. My old life ended the moment I stepped off that plane, Amara said, her voice steady, laced with a quiet, unyielding power. She didn't walk toward the door. Instead, she took a step closer to him, her expressive eyes locking onto his. I'm not leaving. A slow, breathless exhale escaped Min-Jae's lips, the tight tension in his jaw dissolving as a dark, consuming warmth flared in his eyes. He didn't say a word, but the absolute gravity of his obsession settled over the room, binding them together by choice, not by contract. An hour later, the rain had cleared, leaving the city below washed in a brilliant, suffocating sea of neon sapphire and pink. Amara stepped out onto the sprawling penthouse balcony, the cool night air catching the fabric of her new gown, a breathtaking, heavy silk the color of deep crimson that flowed around her elegant figure like a royal robe. Her deep brown skin glowed under the moonlight, and diamonds caught the reflection of the towering skyscrapers below. She no longer looked like a captive hiding in a gilded cage. She looked like a deity. A familiar warmth bloomed behind her as Min-Jae stepped onto the balcony. He didn't hesitate this time. His large ringed hands slid smoothly around her waist, pulling her back against his broad, solid chest. Amara leaned into his touch, her own hands resting over his, feeling the dangerous, protective pulse of his heart. They looked out over the glowing empire together. The dynamic had permanently shifted. The chains were gone, replaced by an ironclad devotion. They were no longer master and captive. Standing high above the neon grid, they were the undisputed rulers of Seoul's underworld.